وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Last week we were talking about the pre-Seerah, and we talked about the events that led up to what?
Abraha,
the elephants.
Elephant, yes, army
Yes.
of
Brother Tanvir, can you hand those up? So here, this is a printout of what I showed you last week. And this is an approximate map of some of the powers in Arabia before Islam. And you see in the south there's Himyar, which belongs to the Abyssinian Empire. In the north there's the Banu Lakhm. And to the west of that there's Hassan. And then it says Kinda there, but by the time around when the Prophet ﷺ was born, their Kinda still existed, but their kingdom was no longer. They didn't have a kingdom anymore. And if you look at the second page here, this is that inscription that Abraham left.
Yeah.
They estimate it to be 17 years before the attack with elephants. Can you read that, Brother Tanwir?
By the power of the good Lord and his Messiah, King Abraha Zedman, king of Sheba, Zur, Raidan, Hadramaut, Yemen, and their tribes in the mountains and coastlands, wrote these lines after raiding Ma'ad in the spring in the month of April, after all of Banu Amir revolted. The king appointed Abu Jabr over Kinda and Bishr in Hisn over Saad and Murad.
So Kinda is Kinda, and they were loyal to Himyar, and when he took over Himyar, they were loyal to Abraham. And Sa'd and Murad are two Yemeni tribes.
And they deployed before the army against Banu Amir, Kinda, and Ali at the valley of Zu Markh, and Murad and Saad at the valley on the road to Tirban. They slew and took many captives and spoils, and the king was established. He surrounded Ma'ad like their shadow, and they gave pledges and consented to Amr ibn al-Muzir, who left his son in charge of Ma'ad.
They gave pledges. That means they gave hostages, and that was a common way to ensure submission is to take hostages from the people. That if you do anything, we'll kill the hostages. And sometimes you read about that. Some of the kings who were in charge of some of the tribes of Ma'ad, often the tribes that had a long-standing feud between each other. To make peace, they would take hostages from each of the two tribes, and say, now, if anyone does anything,
We'll kill them.
I'm going to, exact revenge on the hostages that are in my hands. And you also read that in the Seerah. If some of you recall, in the Battle of the Trench, when the Medina was sieged by the Ghatafan and Quraysh and Banu Qurayza, when the relationship started to sour between those three sides, the Banu Qurayza, they sent a messenger to Quraysh saying, we're not going to fight unless you send us hostages, so we can be sure that you're not going to go away and leave us alone to face them by ourselves. That was a common practice. And Amr ibn the translation here is approximate because the Arabic is slightly different from the Arabic that's common now. And Amr ibn al-Mundhir is one of the kings of Banu Lakhm in the north, he's called Amr ibn Hind. And Hind was his mother, and she was Christian, and she built a monastery that's, I think it's still there, or the ruins of the monastery are still there somewhere in Iraq. And he was the one, according to this interpretation of the inscription, that he was appointed as the king over Ma'ad. That didn't last long. He was the one that one of the chiefs chopped off his head with his own sword when he thought he insulted his mother. And there's one of the famous poems from Jahiliyyah is that man bragging about how he chopped off the head of the king.
Then he left Haladan with the good Lord's cavalry in the month of Dhu Illan, 662.
That, again, according to the anthropologist who translated this, that's in either the South Arabian or the Ethiopic calendar, and it's equivalent to 553 in the Roman calendar, which would be about 17 years before the incident with the elephant. We talked about what led up to that attack before. What was it? What was the motive for that campaign against Mecca? Why did
The temple he had built.
the church?
Yeah, church or temple. Somebody had desecrated it or something.
Yeah, he built a big church, a big decorated church in Sana'a, in Yemen, and the intent was everybody's going to make pilgrimage here. So in addition to being religious, it's also like a symbol of submission to his authority. One of the people from the Arabs was offended and he did something bad to the church. And to exact revenge, Abraha said, I'm going to get an army, the biggest army that I can put together, something that they've never seen before, and I'm going to demolish the house that's a rival, the house I built. I'm going to do a little bit of background before. Abraha went to demolish the Kaaba. Where's the Kaaba?
In Mecca.
In Mecca. Who is in Mecca at the time? Just one person?
Means Quraysh.
Quraysh. Who is Quraysh?
There's Adnan, Maad.
Ma'ad.
Yes. If you look at this, the third page here, this is a very broad outline of the divisions of Ma'ad. This is not a family tree. It's not a genealogy. Like if you look at the beginning of this book, there's a family tree of Quraysh, and this one was the son of this one. This is just like a
The tribes.
like the kind of subdivisions, kind of like the Virginia is in the United States, and Albemarle County is in Virginia, and Charlottesville is in Albemarle County, like that. It's not exactly this person. It's a broad outline. Ma'ad, as you can see, is two halves. There are two halves of Ma'ad. Yes? Rabia, and you agree, Saad?
So are these tribes then, or
Yeah,
factions, or?
They're basically tribes,
Okay.
Clans.
but kind of like they're different entities. Ma'ad is two halves, Mudar and Rabia. Mudar is basically two halves. There's the one they call Khindif and the one they call Qais Ailan. In Khindif, there are a number of different branches. One of those branches is Kinana. And Quraysh belongs to Kinana. amongst all of Ma'ad, Kinana they had a special tradition of being like holier than everybody else, and they had a special cult. Before this time, before the time that we're going to read about right now, when Abraha attacked Mecca, before Quraysh was there, there were two other people who had charge of Mecca. Before, two other tribes who were in control of Mecca. Does anyone know who they were? The first one was, yes, Jurhum, from way back. And Jurhum at the time we're talking about now is extinct. They only live in people's memories. They may have been absorbed into other people, but they don't exist anymore as a thing. There was Jurhum, and then after that there was another tribe called, MashaAllah. Where did you learn that from?
What did you call it?
Khuza'a.
Khuza'a.
Remember Khuza'a. Remember Khuza'a. Because Khuza'a we're going to hear a lot about them throughout the Seerah. In a lot of different ways. In Khuza'a, they're even involved in the events that led to the conquest of Mecca. So remember Khuza'a. We're going to come back and talk about them a lot. Before there's Khuza'a is not on this map here. Khuza'a is one of the tribes that they claim to be from Yemen, and a lot of people say no, they're really from Ma'ad. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. They were in charge of the Mecca, the Kaaba, for a while. One of the worst things in the history of Khuza'a is that one of their chiefs was responsible for doing something very bad. What? The worst thing you can imagine. Introducing something to the...
With an idol?
Sure.
Yeah, one of the chiefs of Khuza'a was the one who introduced idols to the Kaaba, at least, not to all of Arabia. And they said this man, his name is Amr ibn Luhay. And there's a hadith in Sahih Bukhari, the Prophet ﷺ said, I saw him dragging his entrails in the fire. And he was the first, apparently he was the first one to introduce the idols to Mecca and to the Arabs. And he was the first one to initiate certain pagan rituals that were practiced before the Prophet ﷺ was sent, such as dedicating certain animals to different idols. There are things that we read about in the Quran, because they were eradicated, no one knows exactly the details of how they used to do them, but they were things introduced by this man. Why? And so at the time, before the time we're talking about now, there are dozens of idols in Mecca, and there are dozens and dozens of idols throughout Arabia. Why did they do that?
Walking behind you.
It's not something we want to sympathize with, and apparently the same reason why people who have the name tag, Muslims, after the Prophet ﷺ, centuries after the Prophet ﷺ, some of us started building shrines over graves and venerating those shrines. And apparently part of it is always these people, they want to have something that makes them different from everybody else. They want to have something, some kind of distinction. And the next people, if they see the other people with something, they want to have it too. And we read that in the Quran, that the children of Israel said to Musa, اجعل لنا إلها كما لهم آلهة. Make for us a God like they have gods. And so, at the time before the Prophet ﷺ sinned, there was one big shrine, one big idol. It was like the goddess of the Arabs. That was not in Mecca, but it was nearby. Where was it? No, closer than that. Ta'if. What was it called? No, Hubal is in Mecca.
Lat.
Al-Lat. And apparently that's like the pan-Arab god or goddess. She was female, according to them. Even in the ruins of that old city that was the capital of Kinda, centuries before Islam, there are inscriptions and there's an altar. It still has blood stains on it. It was where they dedicated sacrifices to Allah. In Mecca, around the Kaaba, there were dozens of different idols. One of the most famous ones was the one you said, sister, Hubal. And apparently that's that was the god of Quraysh, or the goddess of Quraysh. And Abu Sufyan, after the battle of Hubal, he taunted, and after the battle of Uhud, he taunted some of the Muslims saying, saying victory to Hubal. It was because that's their side. And he said, there was another famous, I don't remember where this was, outside Makkah, somewhere. Read about this name once in the Quran, after Al-Lat, in Surah Al-Lat. Al-Uzza. And we read after the Battle of Uhud, he also taunted them, saying, "Lana al-Uzza wa la Uzza lakum." We have Uzza and you don't have any Uzza.
And Prophet ﷺ replied to
yes,
this.
we'll say that in a second.
Yeah.
Which is, again, like what we're saying, it's the spirit of competition, rivalry between people. I want to have something that no one else has. And so he said, radiyallahu an Abi Sufyan, he became Muslim later, but at the time he said, we have al-Uzza and you don't have any Uzza. What did the Prophet say?
I don't remember it, but yeah, he said that we had Allah, but it was in the same rhyming way as he said it.
Yes, he said, Allahu mawlana wa la mawla lahu.
Yeah.
He said, say to him, Allah is on our side and nobody is on your side. You have no one on your side. At the time, though, there's still, they have these different individual idols, shrines that they revere. But there's still the Kaaba, and they still know who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, just like every son and daughter of Adam knows who made him. Every human being has that branded in his heart. And you'll find, as far as I know, every people that have ever lived in any place in the world, from this day to Adam. You would go to some places, some lost tribe in the middle of the ocean somewhere, or in the middle of the jungle. They may not know what electricity is. They may not know what the wheel is, but they know what religion is. They know what worship is, and they know what God means. You don't have to, it's not a new concept that you have to introduce to any people, because that's ingrained in everyone's heart. And nowadays they say that there are some people called atheists. I don't believe in their existence. That's just, in the Quran, and as far as I know, in any of the revealed scripture, that's not an issue that you have to believe that Allah subhanahu. Everybody knows that already, even if some people are so faithless that they deny it with their mouths. That's not the issue. The issue is to worship Him and don't worship anything or anyone other than Him. to worship Him and be faithful to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just like the commandment to be good to your parents. Me, if I renounce my parents and if I disown, that's being really bad. But just acknowledging that I have parents doesn't make me a good. So basically, everybody does that. Of course, I'm here. Of course, I have parents. That's not the commandment that makes me a virtuous person. The commandment is to honor my parents. Okay, going back to where at the time Quraysh is in charge of. There was Jurhum. Things happened in ancient history, and Jurhum was out. Apparently there were fights or wars. Khuza'ah then was in charge, were the custodians of Mecca for a number of years. Eventually, a man named Qusay, and you'll read about this in one of the chapters in the beginning of this book. A man named Qusay Qusay ibn Kilab took over Mecca again and installed his family there who were Quraysh. The Quraysh is one of his great-grandfathers. And anyone who is descended from that great-grandfather belongs to Quraysh. Qusay ibn Kilab. Quraysh, there's different clans, we'll get into that later. Quraysh and all of Kinana. Kinana is the mother tribe of Quraysh. One of the things that distinguished Quraysh, we mentioned this before, Quraysh didn't give any submission to any king. They weren't loyal to any king. They weren't under the authority of any king. And that was prestige for them. Also, and a lot of this came from them being custodians of the Kaaba. Also, they had something called the we read about this in the Quran, in the surah after Surah Al-Fil. What's the surah after Surah Al-Fil? Surah Quraysh. What's the first word?
Layla.
They had something called Ilaf, which is like immunity.
Habituation. Habituated.
No, it's not what it's something, it's like a specific term. It's like almost like diplomatic immunity. It's a approximate translation. The ilaf means, so where's their livelihood mainly from?
Trade.
From trade. They're merchants. The ilaf means that they can travel north, south, east, west. They go to the Byzantines, the Persians, Yemen, and to Ethiopia. And nobody will mess with them. The other tribes, they either have to give submission to a king and pay tribute to the king for protection, or they have to have a pact with another tribe, meaning that we come, if you want us to be safe when you come through our way, you have to do something for us in return. You have to fight on our side when we want you to fight, and then we'll fight on your side. So Quraysh, they were above that. They were given immunity. They could go north, south on their caravan routes, and they were if this person was, they said, Hirmi, is from the Haram, then the rest of the Arabs aren't going to fight him. And so we read at the end of that surah, الَّذِي أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ وَآمَنَهُم مِّن خَوْفٍ. He's the one who fed them instead of hunger, so they had their livelihood from these trade routes, and made them safe after fear. So they were safe. They weren't worried about anyone attack. They weren't worried about anyone raiding their city. And we see what happened with the army of Abraham. And they weren't worried about anyone for the most part, about anyone attacking them when they traveled to and fro. They also had something called Al-Humsa. Al-Humsa. And this is part of their cult. And we've talked about this in different situations a number of times before. This is kind of religious rites that they invented. Does anyone know one of the examples of this? They say, when they interpret this word, so the cult is called Al-Humsa, and the people who fall are called Al-Hums, and one person is called Ahmas, if he belongs to that. Does anyone know what that? They say, when they interpret, they say it means Hums, it means someone who is very religious or very strict. Does anyone know any of the practices they used to?
Feed the Rijal.
Okay, that's kind of the different branches of Quraysh. They had divided those different responsibilities, and they're also kind of honors among themselves. So there's one clan that had the key to the Kaaba. They're called Abd Dar. And I think to this day, that clan still has the key to the Kaaba. So no one can go in or out without their opening the Kaaba for them. Mm-hmm. Others were in charge of providing water for the pilgrims. Others were in charge of feeding the pilgrims or giving them provisions to go back. These are not necessarily bad things, and some of these were continued after Islam. They're not necessarily bad things, but some of these things are over the line. Like, what were some of the things that the Hums used to do?
Taking care of idols.
What's that?
It's taking care of their idols.
One of the things that they invented is that anyone who comes to make tawaf, for example, if he's not from the Hums, he has to be wearing the clothes provided for him by the Hums. He can't make tawaf in his own clothes. He has to get clothes he has to go to one of them and ask for them to clothe him. If he can't do that, if he or she can't do it, then what do? They do it without any clothes.
What?
Yeah. And I think there are some reasons, like if you actually did it in your clothes, then you have to throw away the clothes afterwards. You have to discard the clothes. That's one of the rules they made. Another is that they don't go out. In part of Hajj, the people go out and stop in
Tents.
Well, yeah, tents, of course. But the farthest place they go out away from Mecca is no farther than that, Sister Saki.
I didn't say anything.
Well, you
attended the
Yes, you attended.
Hajj.
Oh, okay. So the furthest so it's not Mina, it's not Medina.
No.
Furthest is Medina.
It starts with that.
Then
Then
Muzdalifah.
after that, right after that.
After that,
She said Mina.
It's not Mina.
it's not Mina.
It's the biggest. We fast on the day.
Oh.
Usually
Arafat.
on the
Arafat.
8th.
Oh, Arafat. Okay,
Arafat.
okay.
Alhamdulillah. So one of the things that is they won't go out to Arafat because we're special. We're the children of the Haram. It's not proper, it's not fitting for us to leave the Haram with everybody else. So they stay inside the Haram and they don't go out to Arafat with everybody else. That's what we read in the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, ثُمَّ أَفِيضُوا مِنْ حَيْثُ أَفَاضَ النَّاسِ. Then go out where everybody else goes out. One of the other traditions that they invented is, what is it? I think when they're in Ihram, they can't enter a house from the front door. I'm not sure if it's not important to understand it exactly right, but it's they can't go through the front door of a house. They have to, it's maybe more complicated than that. They have to go through the back door. We read in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَيْسَ الْبِرُّ بِأَن تَأْتُوا الْبُيُوتَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهَا وَلَكِنَّ الْبِرَّ مَنِ اتَّقَى وَأْتُوا الْبُيُوتَ مِنْ أَبْوَابِهَا. That piety is not entering the house from the back door. Piety is, virtue is someone who is pious, who fears Allah. And وَأْتُوا الْبُيُوتَ مِنْ أَبْوَابِهَا. Enter the doors, enter the houses from their doors. And again, these are ways that they're supposedly strict in their religion. But it's important to look at these things. And these extra challenges, they're not, even though the person claims to be more religious, they're not for the glory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're not virtue. What they do is they're for the glory of the people who do them. And they're to make some people different from other people. And so that people who come out, anybody who's not from the homes, they have to go and ask for clothing from the homes. And the privilege to make tawaf is in their hands. That's not for something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with. That's not for the glory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's for the glory of people. And this is something that was abolished when the Prophet ﷺ was sent. But something that's interesting is it was abolished, done away with, and basically forgotten without it ever being mentioned by name in the Quran. This word is not in the Quran. You read it some places in different ahadith, but it's not in the Quran. And there's a lesson in that too, that like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, an evil word is like evil word is like an evil tree that's uprooted from the ground and it has no foundation. Bad things like this, you don't have to. You just put something good in their place and they wash away. You don't have to get an axe and start trying to chop it down and spend your time talking about it. Just say what's right, and eventually the good does away with what's wrong. There are other things, again, that I don't remember, and this is a part of Jahiliyyah that was a large part forgotten. And in the centuries after Islam, a lot of people didn't really understand, and we still don't understand exactly what their rituals were in detail. And it's alhamdulillah, it's no loss to anyone. But again, there's a lesson to be learned from this, and that people, sometimes in the name of religion, add things or do strict things, and it's not necessarily things that make them more pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or makes them more pious. It's things that give some people a distinction from other people. Or they're making the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala crooked. And the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Sirat Mustaqim. It's a straight path. At the time that we're talking about right now, the big chief, the head of Quraysh, the head of Mecca at the time, is basically one man. That man was named?
Was it Abu Bakr?
No, his father. Abdul Muttalib. You can read about some of his genealogy in the book, and we'll talk about that in the weeks to come, inshallah. When Abraha set out to attack to demolish the Kaaba, he prepared this great army, something that Arabs had never faced before. And he set off from Yemen. When he set off, there was one of the chiefs from one of the Yemeni tribes down south. His name was Dhu Nafar. He got together an army and tried to stop him. All of the Arabs, whether they're Ma'ad or Yemen, they all venerate they all revere the Kaaba. And as we'll see later on, that the Aus and the Khazraj from Medina, who are from Yemen, they met with the Prophet ﷺ. They were coming to make Hajj. He tried to confront that army. He was easily vanquished, and that man was taken captive. He pleaded with Abraha to spare his life, and if you spare my life, I'll try to help you in some way. So Abraha spared him and kept him with the army. They then got a little bit farther north, and there were some smaller tribes, some Yemeni tribes, they're called Khatam. They again put up resistance. Their resistance was even weaker than the resistance of Dhu Nafar. Khatam, they still live there, in the same places where they lived at the time. And he mentions there are two branches, Shahran and Nahis, I think. And I used to have a very good friend in Saudi Arabia who was called Shahrani. And he lived in a place came from a place called Khamis Mushayt. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah,
My brother is there.
He's there, yeah. There are a lot of people there named Shahrani, and if they're Shahrani, they're from Khatam. One of the wife of Ja'far, cousin of the Prophet ﷺ, was from Khatam. And there's a hadith in Sahih Muslim when the Prophet ﷺ was making Hajj. One of the sons of Al-Abbas, who would be one of the cousins of the Prophet ﷺ, was sitting behind him on his camel, and a woman from Khatam came to ask the Prophet ﷺ some questions, and she was apparently very pretty. So Al-Fadl, he started looking at her, and the Prophet ﷺ with his hand, he moved his face to the other direction, and so he turned around from the other side to look at her. She was from Khafa'am, the same tribe. They tried to resist. Again, it was even weaker than Nafar, and they were put down. And again, their leader, whose name was Nufail, was taken captive. And again, he pleaded for his life and said, if you spare me, I'll be your guide. I'll show you how to get to where you're going. He then came farther north to a place called Ta'if. Where is it, Ta'if?
It's like
It's to the east of Mecca. And Ta'if is where another very big thing was. What's in Ta'if? You just said it a few minutes ago.
That
Nope.
what idol?
Yes. What? Allat, which was very big. The chief of the tribe in Ta'if, which is called, does anyone know what it's called? Thaqif, and they're still there in Ta'if. His name was Mas'ud ibn Mu'attab. He came out and said, "Oh, king, you don't want to, this is what our shrine here, this is not what you're looking for. It's in this other city over there. You want to make sure that it's in this other city over there. We hear and we obey, we're at your service. You don't want to, this is not what you came out for. It's over in this direction. We'll go out with you and we'll help you. We'll show you where it is." Again, they're worried about protecting their personal shrine. So again, there was a man, I think it was Abu Righal, who joined the army and sent them to go to Mecca. When he got outside Mecca, he sent a messenger to call the chief of this town and tell him to come talk to me. Tell him that I didn't come out. I don't come out for a battle. I'm going to do away with that building there. Nobody has to get hurt. On his way there, he had captured some of the property of Quraysh. He had captured some camels that belonged to the chief of Quraysh, who was the chief? Abdul Muttalib. The people who lived in cities, if they had herds of camels, they took care of them outside of the city, because they can't keep 100 camels in the middle of the city. So the messenger went to the chief of Quraysh. Who was the chief of Quraysh? Abdul Muttalib. He came out. According to the tradition, they say that he had a very impressive appearance. When the king first saw him, he was filled with respect for him. When he started talking to him, they say it through an interpreter. Abdul Muttalib made the request you took camels of mine, I want the camels back. They say the king said, when I first saw you, I respected you, but you just fell in my eyes. I'm coming to destroy this house that's, it's your prestige and the prestige of your clan, and you're asking about these camels. According to tradition, they say that Abdul Muttalib responded and said, what did he say?
Allah will take you.
Yes, he said, according to tradition, he said, "Ana Rabbul Ibil, wa lil bayti Rabbun yahmi." I'm the Lord of the camels, and the house has a Lord that will take care of it. So they say Abdul Muttalib, and there was no, Quraysh never dreamed of going out to offer any resistance. They were outnumbered and outmanned, and they were out-equipped. They say Abdul Muttalib went back, and they say that he and some of the chiefs, they held gate of the Kaaba, and they made pleas to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's described in different books of history. And then he told all of the clans to go and hide, go up in the mountains, go hide in the different, on top of the mountains, in the valleys, get out of the way of the army. So Abraha, he then led the army on towards Mecca. He said when they got close around the place that's called, I think they call it Al-Mughammis. It's near Muzdalifah now. It's right outside of Mecca on the way to Taif. This man, Nufail, he had his conscience wouldn't let him go on. So they say he whispered in the ear of the lead elephant to stop and don't go and do what you're being told to do. So the elephant sat down. They say he made, and then the man ran away. He escaped. They say the elephant sat down, refused to move. And they tried to whip it, and they poked it with hooks and everything like that to get to go for it. It wouldn't budge. They tried to make it go back to the east. It would run. They pointed it to the north, it would run. They pointed it to the south, it would run. They pointed it to the east, it would stop. It wouldn't budge. So the Quraysh are looking at the tops of the mountains, looking at what's going to happen to the Kaaba, and they're expecting to see for all they know, they're going to see this army of elephants come and put it to the ground. Instead of seeing that, they see the elephant won't move. And then eventually, they see what we read in the Quran, and the sky is now covered with birds. Flocks of birds coming from out of nowhere, and they pelt this army with rocks, and the army is vanquished. Some of them apparently die in their place. The rest flee and go back to Yemen without the Quraysh offering any resistance. And they say Abraham survived that attack and was the one who retreated back to Yemen, but he didn't last very long. In Yemen, he died shortly afterwards. That was the beginning of the end of the control of the Abyssinians over Yemen. Different things happened and other people got involved. We don't need to go there. This incident, we read about this in the Quran, and it's not, we believe in it out of faith, we believe whatever is in the Quran, but it's not, the message in the Quran is not telling people that it happened, because everybody knows that it happened. And the historicity, if that's a word, I think it is, of that, it's not in question. That's not something that happened inside a house somewhere. That happened in public. And all of these different chiefs from all of these different tribes are involved. And this is a man taking not just an army, but an army with elephants at the head of it, and trying to do this in public, and they were vanquished in public. And the death of a king is not like the death of an average citizen. It's a historic event. And the message in the Quran is to take a sign and a lesson from what happened. And later on, the Prophet ﷺ, would say later on, a couple of different incidents. And the Prophet ﷺ came to make Umrah in the year that we call the year of Hudaybiyah. They ended up not making Umrah, but they made a treaty. On the way to Mecca, his camel sat down, and wouldn't budge. Some people said, خلعت القصواء. Al-Qaswa, which was the name of this camel, is now being stubborn. Prophet ﷺ said, ما خلعت القصواء وما ذاك لها بخلق. She's not being stubborn, and she doesn't act like that. حبسها حابس الفيل. What stopped the elephant stopped her. And then later on, after the Prophet ﷺ brought an army to Mecca, and the Prophet ﷺ was given Mecca. Mecca was released from the mushrikeen. And the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ حَبَسَ عَنْ مَكَّةَ الْفِيلَ وَسَلَّطَ عَلَيْهَا رَسُولَهُ وَالْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Allah held the elephants back from Mecca, but put it in the hands, but gave it over to his messenger and to the faithful. Those are two times the Prophet ﷺ referred to that incident. Later events. This, almost everyone agrees this was in the year, I'm not mistaken, does anyone know? According to the Roman calendar. 570. And as far as I know, almost everyone agrees that this is the year during which the Prophet ﷺ was born. And this is basically, so far all we've been talking about is pre-Seerah. We'll start, inshallah, next week from the birth and the early life of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is in the early chapters of this book. And Sister Ziba, I had promised before that we would talk about the Prophet ﷺ in earlier scriptures. We'll postpone that until right before we talk about the first revelation, because that's when it's most appropriate, inshallah. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى ال محمد وبارك على محمد وعلى ال محمد كما صليت وباركت على ابراهيم وعلى ال ابراهيم انك حميد مجيد سبحانك